Good afternoon, friends. I'm Stephen Bahaja from the Life, Marriage and Family team of the Archdiocese of Sydney, and I'd like to welcome you to this special discussion today. We will be having a chat with Professor Ron and Mavis Pirola on the topic of grandparenting. Welcome, Ron and Mavis.
Thank you, Stephen. It's good to be with you.
It's fantastic to be with you, and thank you for making time to be with us on this special feast day. 5 years ago, Pope Francis promulgated a papal exhortation called The Joy of Love, a document that provides a beautiful blueprint for the place, importance, and critical work of the Christian family in the midst of the modern world. Pope Francis has called us this year to take another look at this document. And during this weekend, when we celebrate the feast day of Saints Joachim and Anne, the grandparents of Jesus, to take a special look at the role that grandparents play in families and the great contributions that they make to society. At the end of May, he even wrote a special letter to grandparents and the elderly, which in my own humble opinion is one of the most beautiful of all the letters that he has written thus far in this pontificate. And it is that letter that will form the heart of our discussion this afternoon. Ron and Mavis, you have known a few popes in your lifetime and have read one or two of their letters, so we are very interested in hearing what you have to say about this letter. But before we do, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you are from, how you met, and then a bit more about your own family, and then right up to today.
Oh, well, Stephen, our families of origin were very different. My mother was English and my father was Italian. They were both Catholic, and I grew up in a very Catholic family, Catholic environment. My father was a businessman whose work took him around the world all his life, really, and the family moved with him for long periods of time. In all that, we said the family rosary, and whenever possible, my father was a daily communicant. But my older brother was born in Spain. I was born in Mexico.
Wow.
And two younger siblings were born in Sydney. But eventually the family settled in Sydney, or made it as their base in 1951. And I went to university and started medicine there, studying medicine.
Well, my background was Irish-English. I was born in Perth and spent part of my childhood in Darwin. And then the family moved to Sydney also. My early faith experience was very different to Ron's. My father was a Masonic leader in Perth, and my mother was a Catholic. In those days, it was a very challenging situation, to say the least. But I have no doubt that in answer to prayer, my father was received into the church, and he and I were actually confirmed together.
Wow.
Eventually, I also ended up at Sydney University. And I lived on campus at Sancta Sophia College. And it was there that Ron and I met at a social gathering. And it was an immediate mutual attraction. And as soon as we graduated, we married.
So you're attracted to his Mexican ways.
Mixed up. He was a mixed up.
There you go.
He was certainly different.
What a background, and wow, so colourful and so interesting. Darwin to Perth to Mexico and Spain. Wow, that's fantastic. I wasn't expecting that. Can I ask Mavis, Santa Sophia? Does that mean that you have a Dominican influence there in the background? Was that the?
No, it's Sacré-Cœur.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there you
go. But it's actually, the college is a very special place in our lives.
Right,
Not only that we happened to meet there,
yes,
but we also held the first marriage encounter weekend in Australia at the college.
Oh,
and just a couple of years ago, we returned again to celebrate our 60th wedding anniversary. So it's one of those special places.
For sure. That's beautiful. Okay. So that got you up to your marriage, and then I suppose some children started coming along.
Yeah. By the way, I always say that the best thing I got out of uni was that I met Mavis there.
Of course.
Of course.
That means you'll get dinner tonight, you know?
Yeah, and a lot's happened since then. We've been blessed with 4 children. Our eldest is a son and then 3 daughters. And we have 8 grandchildren, and now we have 2 great-grandchildren.
Congratulations.
Yeah, praise God. And work and studies took us as a family. We also moved. We went to Perth and then to Sydney, then to London, New York. These are all a few years at a time, but we've been back in Sydney now for many years. So, and here we are. Up to now, what more do you want us to say?
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. That gives us a lot to know that you're very experienced. So we left you just now, New York, back to Sydney, but I just want to ask you about now flying back off to Rome. I remember when I was in Parramatta, knowing that you were representing us all over in Rome for the preparation phase for the Synod on the Family. That was in 2015, but I believe that you were there a little bit before that. Now, can I just ask the first question? Why was it that you, of all the couples in Australia, why were the 2 of you chosen?
It's a bit of a mystery, Steve, but it's a long story. So if you'll bear with us,
of course,
we could just go back and say, well, first of all, we were nominated for that position, that honour, by the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. And that was presumably because we'd been heavily involved in marriage and family ministry. But really, that actually began just because one day a couple knocked on our door, a work colleague and his wife, one Sunday morning, and they wanted to invite us to join them in a movement for married couples called Teams, or also known as Teams of Our Lady. And that was our first introduction to small Christian community, where we met regularly with other couples. We prayed together. We would share what married life, what it was like, and try and help each other and support each other in our family life and in our faith. And that led us then later on to experience Marriage Encounter. That was when we were in New York. And again, we were involved in with other couples. And we actually brought Marriage Encounter, or helped to bring Marriage Encounter back to Australia. But working with those other couples gave us insights into our own marriage, and it helped us to see things in perspective. We could see that our hurts, our failures, the times that we'd lie awake at night wondering where we'd gone wrong. Was this the beginning of the end? All those things that can happen in married life. And we also came to see that these were points of opportunities for growth in our marriage, times when we could pray more and trust in God and grow more. So all of this helped us to introduce a number of initiatives in marriage ministry in Australia. And
well, along the way, and much to our surprise, we were appointed as members of the of Pope John Paul II's newly formed Pontifical Council for the Family. And we served on that for some 28 years in the Vatican. And we also participated in a synod on the laity in 1987, and we were able to use these experiences to bring back, to be used in the development of the Australian Catholic Marriage and Family Council. And along the way also, on a return trip to New York, our children, who were by then teenagers, they experienced the Antioch Youth Movement, and they brought that back to Australia. So we were able to work as a family, in ministry as a family. Such a very wonderful, wonderful privilege. And our children spoke the gospel back to us. And as also now our grandchildren, we also learned from the grandchildren. And all that, I guess, all that's the background of all those along our journey led us to that extraordinary Synod on the Family in 2014.
I might just jump back a bit. Do you have any special memories of Pope John Paul II at all, like during your time on the Pontifical
yes.
for the Family? Would you like to share any special one at all? Any memories?
Yeah.
We have a special love for him. He was almost like a grandparent to us, seriously.
Yeah.
we would only meet him briefly at each meeting generally, although at the Synod on the Laity, we were privileged to, he actually had all the participants at the Synod, 10 at a time, come and have a meal with him during the Synod. And so we were part of one of those 10 groups of 10 having dinner with him and sitting and just chatting with him. Of course, we read a lot of the stuff that he wrote. We couldn't read it all. He was a prolific writer, but it was beautiful, inspiring stuff. And he was so personal and so dynamic too. He was when he died. Actually, unfortunately, Mavis's mother was sick at the time, very ill, and we couldn't go over there. But we would have gone we would have given anything to go there and be there. So he was very important to us.
I have a very special memory of him.
Oh, yes.
Because during our time on the council, I had breast cancer. And I managed to get over to one of the meetings when I was recovering. And one of the members of one of the bishops must have mentioned it to him. And at the end of one of our meetings with him, when everybody's milling around a little bit, he came over to me, he made a point of coming over to me, and he gave me a big hug. And I always say, I've been hugged by a saint. Of course. Ron reckons he can't compete with that. So.
Yeah, I often make the joke that you're a third-class relic. There you go. Because I had a cousin that when Mother Teresa came to Australia, there was a big gathering of all places at Westfields Parramatta. And my cousin ended up getting a pat on the head from Saint Mother Teresa. So she's been in third-class relic since she was 4. But anyway,
Lovely.
Okay. Look, just a little bit more. A couple of questions. I think these are nice insights, just also into not only into yourselves, but also just the work of the church, and gives us a connection to Rome. So what is a synod like? It's huge. It's something universal in the whole experience of humanity, really, all these experiences coming in from different dioceses all around the world. What was it like for you to be there?
Well, I'd just like to say, first of all, that synods of bishops were set up after the Second Vatican Council to give advice to the Pope. That was the basic idea. And what happens is that about 200 bishops, approximately, it varies from each one, usually about 50 laity take part. And this occurs about every 3 years. They take one topic, they discuss this, and they come up with recommendations for the Pope, who usually writes a teaching document at the end of it. And the Synod itself has no teaching authority, but it's an advice body. But they usually last about 4 weeks. And what happens is that you're all in a huge auditorium. The mornings are spent listening to one very strictly timed talk. They're really strict about the time, and it's only about up to 8 minutes maximum. And these are each bishop brings his own prepared talk. They're translated simultaneously into 5 languages: English, French, German, Spanish, Italian. Then the afternoon is spent in working groups, again according to language, and then those groups come up with suggestions. These are synthesized into a series of points which are voted on at the end of the whole meeting. Only the bishops have voting rights, not the lay people. And these are presented to the Pope, and then he writes his teaching document out of that. So that's how it fundamentally works.
Excellent.
It's an extraordinary experience of the universal church, Steve, with all its cultural variations and challenges. And it's hard work listening to talk after talk, often through simultaneous those translations. But certainly for us personally, it's a deep learning experience and an awesome privilege. And it's very humbling and challenging at the same time.
So, and what could I understand that what was your contribution? So you maybe gave a presentation, is that what I remember? And then
Yes, that's correct, yes. So ours was actually at the Synod, the Extraordinary Synod. our 4 minutes was at the very beginning
Right.
of the whole process.
So you set the tone.
Well,
and the bar.
No, not really. We caused a few.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay, and then I suppose you also then contributed in different working groups along the way. Would it work like that as well?
Well, we were in one working group.
In one working group. Okay.
Yeah. So
Archbishop Hart was part of that also.
Archbishop Hart from Melbourne, of course. He was in that group, and yes, each group would have had about 15 people in it, mainly bishops and some lay people. And so that group would work right through the whole process of the synod and come up with its suggestions.
Fantastic. And we know that at the end of that, maybe it was a year or so later, after the 2015, that we were received as a church Amoris Laetitia out of the back end of that, didn't we? So that's where we're moving to now, to Pope Francis and his love for grandparents. Now, Pope Francis has often made a point about talking about grandparents, and there's even been a few audiences, the famous Wednesday audiences that were focused on the family, but then there were specific Wednesday audiences on grandparents. But he speaks about grandparents often, and even just recently, as recent as last year during the month of June, which is traditionally focused on the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Pope Francis said, "There is an ancient prayer, I learned it from my grandmother, which said, 'Jesus, make my heart more like yours.' It is a beautiful prayer," he continued, "make my heart like yours. A beautiful prayer, short to pray this month. Shall we say it together now? Jesus, make my heart like yours." Once more, Jesus, make my heart like yours. Besides the fact that you can really hear Pope Francis saying that, he really has a wonderful way of bringing prayer, which can sometimes seem out there, into the concrete reality of our life. What is it, do you think, that makes Pope Francis speak about grandparents so much?
Well, I agree with you. He certainly talks about grandparents a lot. He's always done that right from the beginning of his pontificate. I think because he's such a keen observer of people, because he mixes with them. When he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he would regularly, each week, he would spend specific times, days with the poor, working with the poor, mixing with them, hearing their problems. And he must have seen a lot of grandparents in that time. And he was obviously very influenced by his grandmother in particular. He mentions her in particular and the way she taught him his prayers as a child. So she obviously had a big impact on him. And I guess that's where this all comes from. But he's such a pastoral person. He just talks practically.
We actually, at the Synod, the extraordinary Synod, we experienced. We think it was probably different to previous ones, in that he mixed more freely with everybody at the Synod. You know, he was very approachable. At coffee time, you could just go up and speak to him. You know, so that what's it called? That empathy he seems to have. You know, naturally talking to people. And I'm sure he would have experienced that very much as an archbishop.
I think I remember seeing him. He even waited in line for his coffee.
Yeah. And there was a little chapel, by the way, just next to the hall, and people would pop in there for a prayer whenever they could. And if you could pop in there for a prayer and suddenly find you're kneeling next to Pope Francis, and he's praying too. You know, he's just coming in, and he's just a natural person. It's wonderful. I'm not saying that John Paul II wasn't also fantastic in his own right. He had a different, more expansive personality, if you like. But but they're both wonderful.
Fantastic. So Pope Francis's grandmother prayed with him, taught him to pray. How do you pray with your own grandchildren?
That spans 30 years.
And also, we always think we're failures. You can never pray well enough, can you? At least, but anyway. Yes, that spans. I suppose. First of all, we've always tried to make it natural, just to look for opportunities to make. We'd like to think of prayer as being communication. Well, it is communication, isn't it? It's talking and listening. And so we try to just bring prayer into conversation, like if we're in the kids with the garden, and in the garden with the kids, and you see a beautiful flower or an amazing coloured beetle, you can say, "Oh, thank you, Lord, for giving us such wonderful gifts of nature," and meaning it too. So that it just becomes part of one's life. We've also, when the kids were young, we would, the grandkids were young,
yes,
we would look for every opportunity if we were having dinner at their place to after dinner to kneel around the fireplace and pray together. We used to focus on a 3-word system of thanks, sorry, and please. In other words, what do I thank God for today? I mean, everyone does this, I suppose. What do I have to say sorry for today, and what do I want to pray for particularly today? So that's and then the meal times.
Yeah, meal time is always just a habit of holding hands around the table and thanking God for what we're about to receive and what we had to thank the day for. And it was very natural, and that's we still do that around the table with our grandchildren.
That's a given. And to ask God's blessing on the conversation and what we're doing so that we're unified at that meal.
Now that they're young adults, they're more scattered around the place. It's important that they know that we pray for them by name every day.
Wow, that's beautiful. I like what you said, because we pray all the time together, but the holding of the hands, that's something quite beautiful. Did you do that from day one with your own children, and then it just continues?
Yeah. And our children have carried that on into their family lives too.
It makes it very intimate, doesn't it? Might see if we can pick that up, and I might have a rebellion on my hand.
It's interesting when they bring their boyfriends and girlfriends along.
Oh, well, that they must feel part of the family straight away just by having been in that circle of holding hands. Beautiful.
I think it helps. I think physical gestures. I mean, I do this in my practice as a doctor. I believe that touching people is very important, and the way you touch them is important. And it's an expression. It's part of your body language. It should come into our prayers as well.
Yes, for sure. That's beautiful. Okay, let's get into the Pope's letter. I mentioned earlier that Pope Francis wrote a letter, I think it was on the 31st of May this year, to grandparents and the elderly. We should say that as well. It isn't a long letter, as some papal letters can be, but it sure provides us with plenty of practical advice on what we should do as grandparents. It also sets a context for today. I suppose he was almost speaking at the back end of the COVID pandemic and this opening up that is happening in Europe at the moment. But for us to be reading it in the midst of lockdown here in New South Wales has made that context very, very real to us again. I probably just should note here, even though Ron and Mavis are super experienced grandparents, I'm going to put myself forward as an apprentice grandfather. We've got our 2 little young grandchildren, so I have a little ticket into this conversation.
That's wonderful. Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're delighted.
Thank you. Okay. So question, where does it rank this letter in what the church has given us over the years in light of its specific grandparenting focus? And you've mentioned that you spent a lot of times on the pontifical counsel for the family. Did that really come through in those days, an emphasis on grandparenting in the church's documents then?
Well, I think every pope who's written anything on the family has always mentioned grandparents as part of the total picture, and that's appropriate. To be honest, we can't actually remember, and we may be wrong about this, but we can't remember a pope that's written just on grandparents specifically, which is interesting, actually, and I have to check on that. Maybe we're wrong, but I don't remember a specific letter on grandparenting. That's point one. And the other thing is that it just seems to come from Pope Francis, because he's always talking about grandparents. He brings, not always, but very, very commonly, it's been a big feature of his pontificate, I think. Yeah, and it just comes from his pastoral style, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Well, he's got a very engaging style in writing. You know, he's writing as a pastor, just talking to his people. He uses simple and relatable examples. And especially now he's writing in the context of the current pandemic, you know, which is very relatable. Yeah.
Okay, well, I've had a look at the letter a couple of times now, and like I said, I really love it. I think it's so beautiful. And I suppose just for our listeners today, I'll just frame it and in a way, I'll give it 6 subheadings, just so as we go through our discussion, people kind of know where we're at. So the first one is the traditional context. So this being the feast day of Saint Joachim and Anne. So the Pope makes reference to that, and this letter was actually timed for the feast day. The second part is the reality of getting older and becoming somewhat more frail. I don't think that's something that we can deny as we get older. I'm just about to hit 50, and I know that I nearly have a heart attack every time I start running. So I'm feeling it. There you go. Actually, I ran for the first time yesterday afternoon, trying to get some, lockdown exercise in. And my daughter looked at me. She says, "Can you still do that?"
Oh, no.
There you go. They like to rub it in. Okay. The third subheading, we'll call it a call to action. So, Pope Francis is saying you're not just there to relax and to retire. There's a call to action. Then he has these 3 beautiful headings: dreams, memory, and he concludes with prayer. And I think just by putting that forward, people will know where we're going. Okay, so let's start talking about Saints Joachim and Anne. The Pope writes, "Tradition has it that Saint Joachim, the grandfather of Jesus, felt estranged from those around him because he had no children. His life, like that of his wife Anne, was considered useless." And I suppose we can understand that in the culture of the time, where there was a real call from all the way back from Genesis to fruitfulness for married couples. He continues, "So the Lord sent an angel to console him while he mused sadly outside the city gates. A messenger from the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Joachim, Joachim, the Lord has heard your insistent prayer.'" So a question for the both of you: how are these Saints Joachim and Anne, related to our story today? And how are they actually important to the people of Sydney living on the other side of the world from the Middle East, and obviously in a different culture and time?
Well, we know very little detail about St. Joachim and Anne, but they've always been an important part of our faith tradition. And the pain and grief associated with their original infertility, it's certainly relatable to many people today. It seems to be a growing problem.
Yes.
And also, if you're meditating on their role as grandparents to Jesus, also helps us, I think, to focus on the human nature undertaken by Jesus, and the fact that our Christian spirituality is incarnational. And this is, you could say, it's brought home to us even more by the fact that we actually have an authentic relic of St. Anne in one of our parishes at St. Anne's at Bondi.
Not many people would know that, would they?
No. Well, it came as a big surprise to us until recently. So,
yeah. And not just a third class relic like yourself, Mavis, but what is it? It's a first class. What does that mean? A first class relic?
First class relic. It means that it's actually belonged to the saint in terms of, say, part of a body.
Part of a body.
Yeah, that's the very
First
authentic
class.
part. Yeah.
This is actually part of her wristbone, I believe.
Yes,
right?
It is a
forearm.
small part, yeah.
And it's a small part, and it's authenticated. I mean, it's not just somebody's authenticated officially.
That's a long story, which we wouldn't have time to talk about here.
We'll have to come back for a second conversation.
I think so.
Okay, that's special.
But Joachim and Anne have been part of the tradition of the church right from the beginning. In the very early days of the church, they were both highly revered. So it's been passed on from family to family right down to the present day. We're tending to lose it a bit in our present society, I think.
How can we encourage devotion to them? I suppose the Pope is doing that by writing this letter and naming him there. But is there something maybe in the day-to-day?
Well, I think, first of all, by praying to them. I mean, the more we pray and meditate on things, and when I pray to a saint, I'd like to think of what was this saint's life like, and you think of Joachim and Anne. Imagine them as the grandparents, as the parents of Mary for a start, and finding out that now she's pregnant, and she's not, and she's to be betrothed to Joseph. You know, all that sort of stuff. You start thinking about this as real people to whom you're talking, whom you're asking to intercede for you to the Lord. And I think gradually they become part of your life in the process. So
I love how you said that. And in my little research that I've done on St. Anne over the last couple of years, I found out that Tuesdays are a day on which we remember St. Anne, just like we do, Wednesdays for St. Joseph and Thursdays for the Holy Eucharist. And Tuesdays are St. Anne's Day, and it's every Tuesday is almost like something fresh. Oh, that's St. Anne's Day, and there you go. So that's how I've built her into my life anyway.
Right.
Okay. So the reality of getting older, I mentioned before, there is that real experience of often getting weaker and sometimes prone to getting weak. The Pope writes with very specific words for us, again, in light of the COVID-related lockdown. He says, I'm well aware that this message comes to you at a difficult time. That's certainly our case here in New South Wales. The pandemic has swept down on us like an unexpected and furious storm. It has been a time of trial for everyone, and especially for us elderly persons. Many of us fell ill. Others died or experienced the death of spouses or loved ones, while others found themselves isolated and alone for long periods. And we know that Pope Francis has only in the last week come out of hospital after being in there for 2 weeks, and a fairly serious operation. I think it was about a 3-hour operation on his intestine, lower intestine. You'd know more about that than me, Professor. But I did.
Well, I'm a gastroenterologist, so
there you go. So I had to spend half an hour looking up the one word. Anyway, you may or may not want to comment on that. But anyway, what are your thoughts on the experience of aging? Is it a curse brought on by humanity by the fall, or is it in fact a time of grace?
Well, aging involves a lessening of control over our lives and an increasing dependence on others. Obviously, it varies.
We get croaky voices more easily.
Obviously, it varies enormously from person to person. And we certainly have regrets and unfulfilled hopes, and certainly can think of many mistakes. But, every time can be a time of grace. Aging gives us more time to reflect on our lives and on our relationship with Jesus.
I think Yeah, I think it brings a renewed appreciation of family, friends, the people who've touched our lives. We find ourselves reflecting on that more and more as we get older. People have been a source of grace for us in our lives. And, if you think that our prime vocation in life is to love God and to express that through our love for those around us, well, that's something that we can always do, no matter how aged we are, and that we can always express love in some way, even if it's a feeble smile is all we can do. That is precious and important. So I don't know. There's some of our thoughts on aging. It's not something we get thrilled about. but
it does have its graces. Yes.
It's all, every time is a time of grace.
That's right. I maybe a year ago, I think it might have been St. Louis de Montfort, and he said that while we're here on earth, we're still in the womb, and that we'll be born into eternal life. So I often say that in a way I'm getting younger as I get older. But anyway, I'm getting ready to be born. So it keeps me thinking positively. What do you think we can learn and then share with younger members of our families and community about this time of the pandemic?
Well, we're the generation that have, in a sense, seen it all. We've, people of our generation, not necessarily ourselves, have been through sometimes migrations, wars. We've seen bushfires and droughts galore over the years. Relationship breakups, financial failures, things that we wish we hadn't done. And all this can help put the pandemic into perspective, because the youngest generation had never had anything like this at all. And
not in Australia.
Not anyway. In Australia. So our younger, here in Sydney anyway, we're very blessed in this country. And sometimes that can even make things harder for people to appreciate something tough. I think the lockdowns make us more aware of relationships. We suddenly realize how important it is to, gosh, we can't even hug our members of our family because they're on the other side of town or something. We can't even go and visit them. That's.
I think the older generations can help put that, as Ron said, help put it into perspective for the younger people and encourage them, to be resilient and also to maintain a spirit of hope, just to push forward.
Yeah, I think if anything, it is quite difficult on the older members of our society. Like even my parents are in their late 70s, and even just to go visit them on compassionate grounds, it's almost, I have to justify the compassionate grounds to go see mum and dad. And they're used. They've got 8 children, and they're used to having someone around every couple of days. And to go and visit them and everything's quiet. They still were quite happy, but I know that they're feeling having that Mediterranean big family background, and everything's very focused on family. They're missing it and they're suffering, and for them to be able to share with their children and grandchildren that we'll have to just do the right thing here, as hard as it is on us. We're doing it, so you can too. And like you said, Mavis, that to share that sense of hope. Okay. So the reality of getting older with the very real experience of getting weaker, and Pope Francis names this reality, but he hits us up immediately, as like you said, Mavis, with a message of hope. Along with that, an encouraging call to action. And just so we can continue to provide the words from this letter and hear Pope Francis speaking, I'll repeat something here. Even at the darkest moments, as in these months of pandemic, and we can say lockdown, the Lord continues to send angels to console our loneliness and to remind us, I am with you always. He says this to you, he says it to me. And Pope Francis continues, and I absolutely love this. It makes no difference how old you are, whether you still work or not, whether you are alone or have a family, whether you became a grandmother or grandfather at a young age or later, whether you are still independent or need assistance, because there is no retirement age from the work of proclaiming the gospel and handing down traditions to your grandchildren. You just need to set out and undertake something new. Something new, in spite of the fact that we might be alone, or we might be sick, or that we're quite on in years. Doesn't let us get out of this, does he? Is the Pope talking just theoretically? I mean, and we sometimes when we get these letters and documents from Rome, we can think, oh, it's up there. Or can this really be done? What is your own personal experience that this is actually a realistic call to action from the Pope?
We loved his challenge to never retire. But I think it's a call to, primarily, it's a call to pass on the faith. And the faith is one of the prime commandments is to love. And we can always love, no matter where we find ourselves. So we've personally find his call very, very motivating. It inspires us to be proactive. Sometimes when you are affirmed in something that you're already doing, you do it better. It's sort of it makes it even more meaningful. So we interpret it basically as responding to what the Lord puts before us every day and try to respond to the need of the time. You could say, Ron was remarking that it reminds us of St. Mary MacKillop's famous saying, never see a need without doing something about it. It could be just a smile or a prayer. But if you're also able to be more active in taking that forward, we think it's a wonderful call, to a renewed vocation, I guess, in later life.
And I think what he's doing is he gives us meaning, puts meaning into our lives, because we find ourselves, all jokes aside, and we're joking a bit, but we can't do what we could do before. I mean, it's just not possible. And that's not all that easy. But the idea that we can do so much, we still can do so much by praying, by smiling, by being with people and keeping them in mind. So actually our lives do still have great meaning. And I see this in the older people around me, my patients and so forth. They have meaning, and it's important that we pass that on to them, the older generation, and to the younger generation, so they appreciate that too.
You've mentioned twice now about this ability to smile at somebody, and Mavis just mentioned, the importance of loving other people. And it's really in our smiles we are slowing down, and we're giving the other person something of ourselves. Smile is to be intentional, isn't it? To actually focus in on that person as an individual, as an unrepeatable individual, somebody who matters just because they're in existence and a child of God. So it's so beautiful. And Pope Francis, I remember in Laudato Si, I remember going through that document and just looking for all those very life-affirming statements that he made in there. And one that has stuck with me really introduces us to our next subheading, which is on dreams. And Pope Francis said in Laudato Si, he said, every human person is God's dream. How uplifting to think of ourselves in that matter. And, even to just think about that person walking towards me as God's dream. Why wouldn't I smile at that person? So Pope Francis says in this letter, he says, your old men, he's quoting from Joel here, your old men shall dream dreams and your young men will have visions. The future of the world depends on this covenant between young and old. Who, if not the young, can take the dreams of the elderly and make them come true? So there's a bit of a question here. What does the Pope mean when he talks about the dreams of the older generation being passed on to the young by way of this covenant? What does he mean by that?
Well, look, you're talking about, just before we answer the question directly, You were talking about young people and old people.
Yeah.
And we've been saying how much he focuses on grandparents, but he always does it with young people as well. He constantly puts the two together. And I think that's a very important background thought behind this letter.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a synod on youth recently, and he, at the opening of the synod, he said to them, look, I know you guys, I'm paraphrasing, you think that the old people are archaic or boring or outdated and so on, but hang on, he said, he said, just remember there's an old Egyptian proverb, if you don't have a grandparent, go out and buy one. They're that important to your life. And he says, yes, young people have the energy and the innovativeness that in their minds and the ability to carry new ideas forward. But we need the older people to give you the dreams that help you develop those ideas. So that's where the dreams comes into this, I think, is the background to this point in this letter. And we always have dreams. We have dreams for the future.
Yes. We dream of even more precious years of life together. We dream of a less fractured world that we seem to be living through at the moment, and peace and families. We especially have dreams for our grandchildren, each of which in their own unique way is so very special to us. We have dreams for their well-being and for whatever state of life they may eventually be called to, whether it's priestly, religious, single or married. But our overall, I guess our overreaching dream for them is that they receive the gift of faith, and that they come to know Jesus. So I think that's just the overriding dream we have for them.
But then we have a particular dream which concerns the sacrament of marriage, which is an area where we've worked so much over the years. And we see young people being bombarded with distorted ideas about, gender fluidity, and sex is presented as just a recreational activity. Oh, what a tragedy. The beautiful thing about the sacrament of matrimony is that despite the inevitable ups and downs and deep hurts that occur, of course, there's a lifetime of caring decisions to love one another. And through this, what happens is that the couple come to see each other's inner beauty and goodness through the lens of their as masculine and feminine, because that's the fundamental, it's a male and female relationship. And just to give you a couple of examples, of an elderly friend of ours has a husband in a nursing home. Now, she not only visits him every day, but she's attentive to his needs. She compliments him on his appearance and plays his favourite music, holds his hand and chats to him about their shared memories. That quiet witness that I see when I go there, and I know their daughter sees when she comes, is a wonderful lesson in life for others. Another example is a priest friend of ours. He told us he brought the Eucharist to the home of a very elderly lady in their a lady parishioner, and the husband met him at the door and took the priest to the bedroom. As the priest looked at the frail, wrinkled woman in the bed, he could hear the husband saying behind him, "Isn't she beautiful?" Now, Pope
Francis, in his encyclical, The Joy of Love, we think captures these examples when he says, and I'll read this just to make sure that I quote correctly. In the course of every marriage, physical appearances change, but this hardly means that love and attraction need fade. If a couple can come up with a shared and lasting life project, they can love one another and live as one until death do them part, enjoying and enriching intimacy. Even if others can no longer see the beauty of one's identity, a spouse continues to see it with the eyes of love, and so his or her affection does not diminish. He or she reaffirms the decision to belong to the other and expresses that choice in faithful and loving closeness. We believe this is a profound truth in these words, and we dream that young couples will see that a permanent and loving relationship is not possible. It's not only possible, but very, very, very desirable. And I think that's when we see what's happening with marriage these days, that we really dream, that will one day come to pass through our younger generations.
I knew for a fact that you were going to talk about that dream of marriage, and thanks be to God. You know, you've mentioned that you were one of those couples that brought marriage encounter to Australia, and we know that your son Byron and Francine are so involved in the Smart Loving Marriage Regional Centre, and have done so much to continue that dream. And I can say that myself, having attended the Renaissance of Marriage conference, where I was able to see the work of Smart Loving and picked up that resource, the program, and said, this is absolute gold. That there are so many, you know, younger generations who are picking that up. And I know that even two of my own sons have used that in that passing on of the dream. So I can definitely give testimony to that. And I thank you for your great passion for sharing that dream with us here in Australia. Let's move to memory. And, you know, the Pope speaks here of war. It's not always the easiest of memories to be speaking about. We know people don't speak about their memories from war. But the Pope does, and he quotes from the famous writer and Auschwitz survivor Edith Brooke, and whom he just recently visited in February of this year, so she's still with us. He says, even illuminating a single conscience, sorry, this is what she says, and he quotes from her, even illuminating a single conscience is worth the effort and pain of keeping alive the memory of what has been. For me, memory is life. Memory is life. There's a lot to reflect on there. What do you think Edith Brooke means? How is this made real today in your own life? And I'll put all the questions out there. How is this relevant to young people today, say your own grandchildren?
Well, memory is life because memories are a major part of who we are. And to bring that home, I think the best thing is to think of the reverse. If someone has lost their memory, sadly through dementia, the people who know that person will tend to say, oh, it's as if he's no longer here. It's so central to who we are. So we all carry memories, of course. You often mention that you're...
Well, I guess I can carry memories of 7 generations. There were 3 before me, like my great-grandmother who used to visit us when I was a child.
What a gift.
My grandmother and my own grandparents, and also my parents, and their stories, their successes and failures, and the way their faith was passed down through their lives, often with great difficulty, has much to teach us, us and also the younger generation. And of course, I also have memories now of the 3 generations coming up behind me, my children, my grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So I think we can somehow share, you know, the experience that come down through the generations. It can do a lot for our younger people.
I had much less experience because I travelled so much and I didn't know my grandparents, and that's a loss. Or at least I knew of them, but I didn't have much to do with them. But I still want to pass on my Italian heritage, and I put a lot of effort into it actually, because I want my children to know something of my Italian history and culture, and my English heritage too. And of course, there's a danger that old people are just seen as talking about. They keep talking about their old boring stories and so on. We have to be careful about that. We have to be conscious about how we pass on our stories. But, everybody, if someone's adopted, they always want to know about their roots. We've seen many, many examples of people who've gone to great lengths because they want to know where they come from. And I think there's a lesson there for us in faith. Although people may seem to reject their faith and there may be some resentment or anger there, they still are interested in the faith of their forebears. And they recognize deeply within themselves anything that's good. That's we're inbuilt to recognize good. It's the way God made us. And so that if we can just share honestly and sensitively our faith with younger people, it arouses a deep curiosity in them. And that's where the elderly have a responsibility to talk appropriately to young people about their own faith experiences, not forcing it on other people, but their own faith experiences. And that's important. You see, people like us grew up before the Second Major Vatican Council. I mean, we have an experience of the church that goes back to
our children can't imagine it.
Yeah, they can't imagine it anyway. Anyway, we just think memory is important. It's a long way of saying it.
Yeah. So that question, the last one, about how relevant are your memories? We like to share our memories. Not everyone actually, but in the main we like to. But how do your grandchildren respond? Do they also ask about your memories? Like, is that something normal? Like, I know my own daughter will often just open up her phone and have a conversation with my dad, and she'll record it. I mean, wow. So if anything, she's recording the stories that he tells her about him growing up. Is that your experience as well? This openness of young people to hearing their memories as well?
Well, I've certainly made an attempt to record some of our history, and they get the grandchildren to interview us, to ask us about things, and so certainly that is part of it. But a lot of young people think life just begins with them at that stage. So it's sensitive that. You just look for the opportunities, and they certainly, I think, are interested. But I know myself, I regret not having asked more questions, of my parents or grandparents now, and it's too late to fill in some of those gaps. But that's life.
I think everyone wants to know the stories. I think it's an inbuilt part of human nature. The Jewish people rely on this very heavily. Their Seder meal. It's a very specific process, and it starts with the youngest member of the family asking the oldest member of the family about the roots of their faith experience, and it's just part of our human nature. I think it's there for everyone.
That's a beautiful example. It's a beautiful example. Just to think that, why do we celebrate this special night? I think it starts something like that. That's the Seder question, doesn't it? Okay.
Can I just interject? I can't resist saying that
yes.
This is part of the Eucharist, actually. It's in memory, and that word memory is very important. We don't study it enough. We're aware of this because one of our daughters has done a thesis on this. But it's our memory of our roots as a people into which Jesus was born, and we need to reflect on that and understand Jesus better through that process. Anyway, I'm sorry to digress.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom. That's what we're here for today, aren't we? Okay, so to close the pastoral letter off, the Pope talks about the aspect of prayer, and this time he quotes from his great predecessor and good friend, Pope Benedict. He quotes Pope Benedict saying, "The prayer of the elderly can protect the world." That's a huge statement, helping it perhaps more effectively than the frenetic activity of many others. How do you pray? So we know that you're out there powerfully protecting the world. How are you doing that? Have you got like a Superman top hat?
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one. We're a pair of opposites, and we're different, very, very different personalities, and so our prayer life is different. For a starter, I believe in a regular rhythm. I'm a morning person, so morning prayer is crucial to me. It's if I don't start the day with prayer, I think the day is going to be a tough day. And I try to focus specifically what I do. I just quickly I try to focus on what's around me, allow myself to be aware of the Lord's presence in my life. I reflect on the day's scripture readings. I look for a line that I might recall during the day that I might think back on and reflect on this process and how is this applying in my daily life. And then I think of the people in my life that I want to pray for. I specifically asked Mary and I asked Joseph to support me in my prayer to the Lord. And I finish with the Our Father, praying for the needs of these people. So that's my simple routine each morning.
Very structured and quite comprehensive.
Structured, yeah. That's I'm an orderly. Try to be an orderly person.
Yeah, we need order.
I'm a night person. We both think that praying as a couple is very important. It's never come easily to us.
No.
Marriage Encounter helped us enormously in praying together more readily. And we usually what we do, we pray together in the evening. We read the daily office together and we intersperse it with spontaneous prayers of thanks and praise and petition. Then we pray the rosary. And the office unites us spiritually with huge numbers of Catholics around the world who are praying at any one time. And that really, we find that very, very supportive, and very encouraging. So that's basically how we pray together.
We actually find prayer is very intimate. I mean, really, it's easy to pray with a large group of people, but if you pray face to face with one person, now you're talking intimately with God, and it's very challenging actually. It's more challenging than praying with a group. We find, at least that's for us anyway. So we find it useful to have something like the office into which we can bring in our spontaneous prayers in the process of praying it at the same time.
I think with couple prayer, there's a great vulnerability there that I'm totally opening up myself. They can see me for who I am as my Creator created me in that conversation there at the deepest level of our souls when God's part of it. And I think that's also, there's the vulnerability bit. Once that vulnerability is received by the other and then the other gives of themselves vulnerably as well. I mean, it's not only such deep prayer and communication, but there's such fruitfulness because the bond is deepened, isn't it? And then I suppose that's where the power is. So my next part of the question was going to be, and you mentioned this before, Mavis, you're praying for your grandchildren every day by name, so they know that you're taking them into the deepest communication of your souls with God. So the question is, have you seen some fruit of this prayer? Has God given you that, I suppose, a certain grace to see the efficacy of this prayer time that you're devoting to your grandchildren?
We find it hard to answer that because
I'll say that as well.
Because go on. He's asking you. Look, as for our prayers being answered, we have no doubt God always listens to us, but it's not always the way we want it at the time. So we're just sort of nervous about saying, "Oh, well, this happened because I."
Yeah, no, only if you know.
I mean, who knows? Who knows what God? God did what worked through that prayer.
But prayer gives us hope, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
There's so many times that we can feel a certain frustration when we want things to be a certain way. But then I think it's actually one of the readings from this week where God might be he might have been saying it to Moses, or Moses says it to the people anyway. He says, "Just be still and let me handle it." And when we know God says be still, it's enter into prayer, isn't it? Be in communion with me, and I'll take care of everything.
I'm sure our prayers have been answered many, many times, but we're just thinking of just a couple of times of intense prayer, when it seemed as though we felt wonderful things were happening. again, as a new grandparent, I remember it was that time that I experienced the breast cancer situation. And it was very doubtful. And I wondered whether I'd live to see my grandchildren grow up or even meet some of them. And I was supported by so much prayer at that time. And we prayed earnestly together. And by God's grace, 23 years later, I'm still here with them, you know. So I just thank God for that. Yeah.
Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. That's what we can.
Yeah.
You know, there was a time once when one evening I was leaving the hospital where I worked, and Mavis rang me on the mobile and said one of our granddaughters, who was just 1 week old, had just been admitted to hospital with a sudden infection. And I popped back into the hospital and found that she was in an operating theatre. I went to the theatre, and there was a group of staff frantically working on this little tot. And I was looking at the monitor, and all of a sudden I could see it was heading down to zero. We were certainly losing her. Boy, I've never prayed so hard in all my life. And short time later, it all started to come good. And now I see this lovely young woman frequently, and I thank God for that moment of prayer and the privilege of seeing her recover.
So let's just hear that again. The prayer of the elderly can protect the world. Protect the world. Okay, let's finish the letter off in that way. That's a beautiful way to end it. Look, before we finish off our conversation today, I want to just ask you about something that I know is dear to your hearts. It's the Grandparents Association, and we know that it was established in Australia a couple of years ago, I think under Cardinal Pell during his time. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what it is? Because I think a lot of people haven't heard of this association. It comes from Ireland, I think you may have said. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it's an international movement with the mission to help grandparents pass on the faith and to keep prayer at the heart of the family. That's the two aims it has, to pass on the faith and keep prayer at the heart of the family. It encourages grandparents at a local parish level to come together as a small faith community for mutual support, encouragement, and prayer, and just to help one another in passing on the faith. The association was founded in Ireland around about 2001 by Catherine Wiley, an Irish grandmother of 10. It began very slowly with pilgrimages and local parish communities. And now it has members and ministries in over 50 countries. It's endorsed by the Vatican as a private association of the family. And it has a website that provides stories of grandparents around the world, as well as news updates, resources, and suggestions for parishes. It also holds a monthly international grandparents Zoom meeting, which actually started in response to the COVID-19, but it's becoming so popular. I think it's going to definitely continue. And they call it the Faith Cafe. And it's open to all. It's free. It's open to all. And each Zoom meeting lasts about an hour. And it has a different theme and a guest speaker each time, and some reflections from grandparents and general discussion and prayer. The association has been advocating Popes Benedict and then Pope Francis for years to have a World Day for grandparents and the elderly. So obviously they're very delighted and overjoyed, by this development.
And for us personally, participating in it raises our awareness of the vocation that Pope Francis has called us to, that you mentioned. And it encourages us never to give up. And through the Faith Cafe, we hear other grandparents talking, and it gives us ideas, different perspectives on things we already knew. There's always something more that we can learn. So we find it quite helpful and motivating. And what else
Well, it's held every second Tuesday of the month, but that's Irish time. Okay, so you have to get up for a 4:30 a.m. meeting on Wednesday morning, which we find still very rewarding.
Yeah. So really, there's a real answer there to what Pope Francis is asking of us in some way in the letter. Like, I mean, if people wanted to do that something new despite our age, despite where we are as grandparents that time, young or old, he says, whether we're widowed or not, there's something that can be done, because if we don't know that there's too many of these associations I don't know of any myself, in my own diocese, but there's something that people can do. I mean, what does it take? Find maybe another couple of like-minded grandparents. And I think, even if there was 4 of you, that's a good base from which to go forward.
It's a great idea. We believe it's a great idea and has enormous potential. But as so often, though, you need someone at the grassroots to drive it, Yeah. So it's just 1 or 2 grandparents in a parish, could be the animators of it.
For sure. And we want to promote this. We want to promote this.
This might happen.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about it now. So this is certainly a concrete step about it. And I know that in preparation for today's Mass, today's celebration of Grandparents' Day and yesterday's Mass on for the first grandparents and elderly celebration that Pope Francis asked us to do, that this is like a springboard. There's something official now that this year was the first year, and we'll continue to do this every year, please God. So, okay, so in the context of this first year of grandparents and the elderly, and the Pope's letter that we've spent quite a bit of time discussing, Professor Ron and Mavis, what are your hopes as to what may come out of these happenings for us here in Australia?
Well, just as you've been saying, hopefully it's a growing awareness of the importance and connection of elderly with the young people, and also especially for the creation at a local parish level, to see that the Grandparents Association, could find its beginning here. We think it's the time for it now, with this encouragement and impetus from Pope Francis, that there's a great possibilities there. But in saying that, could we also, though, stress the importance in an association like this of including older unmarried aunts and uncles? By their faith and life and witness, they can have an enormous impact on their nephews and nieces, So they would also, of course, be included, that they want to be part of this. But I guess that's one of our dreams, that this might take off. We know there's interest emerging in different dioceses. But I think it comes back to the grassroots in the parish, for some grandparents or someone else who's very interested in it, to make it start to happen.
And I think that they're very specific things, and I please God that they will go ahead. But I think just generally, if older people can just be aware of the meaning of their life, that they have just as much meaning as they ever had when they were first born. They, in God's eyes, they always have meaning, and they have things that they can do. God can work through them. Then God is not limited by. We are limited by our human frailty. God is not limited in His ability to work through our human frailty, and I think that's important.
Such a beautiful way to finish our conversation today. I've had such a lovely time having this chat with you, and I'm sure all our listeners have as well. There's such a joy in everything that we've spoken about, and I suppose just listening to what you've said, it's really made me very comfortable with my new title. As in Maltese, Nunnal Stephen. There you go. Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Ron and Mavis, Mrs. Pirola. It has been an absolute privilege for me to have had this conversation with you, and in a way, there's a memory here that you've shared with us. So we are all privileged to have heard of your wisdom that is so connected, so intimately connected with your own lives, with your families of origin, but also the family that God has graced you to bring into this world. So thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And congratulations again on being a grandparent.
No worries.
To you and your wife.
Thank you very much. I'll share that with my lovely
God
Stella. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being with us on this most special first day for grandparents and the elderly. Hope that you've enjoyed our conversation. We will look very hard at what we can do in order to promote the Grandparents Association here in the Archdiocese of Sydney. So hold on and see what comes up in the next month, 2 months or so, because we'll certainly be promoting it as much as we can. Take care, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And Saint Joachim and Anne, pray for us.
Amen.
Bye-bye. See you. Bye.